Tonight, I have been staring at the same face for hours. The candles have burned low enough that any sensible man would have stopped working long ago. But I keep telling myself there is one more thing to correct. Perhaps the shadow beneath her cheek is too heavy. Perhaps it is the corner of her mouth. I step backward, study her again, then move closer. From here, she almost seems amused with me. Lisa has been sitting inside this piece of wood for years now, and still I cannot decide whether I have finished painting her. Most painters would have put down the brush long ago. I know this because I have watched them work. They finish the face, finish the hands, collect their payment, and move on. I have always envied that certainty. I place the brush on the table, but I do not leave. Around me, the workshop is almost silent. Sheets of paper lie everywhere. A study of flowing water rests beneath a drawing of a human shoulder. Nearby are sketches of gears, bones, horses, bridges, fortifications, faces. Some belong to projects I have not touched in months. Others I can barely remember beginning. If a stranger walked into this room, perhaps he would see abundance. Ideas everywhere. Evidence of a mind endlessly at work. But tonight, when I look around, I see something else. I see all the things I have not finished. People may one day call that genius. I did not have the comfort of knowing that. I only knew what it felt like to wake each morning with more ideas than I could possibly complete, and to go to sleep knowing that most of them would still be waiting when I opened my eyes again. Before I tell you how this woman came to follow me for so many years, I should tell you what kind of story this is. You are listening to Untold History, a place for the moments hidden behind the names everyone already knows. If you enjoy seeing history not as a list of victories and dates, but as it might have felt before anyone knew the ending, stay with me. Because the painting in front of me is only one of many things I could not bring myself to finish. That feeling began long before Lisa. When I was younger, I believed curiosity was only a gift. Perhaps it was. Give me a river and I could lose an afternoon watching the water curl around stone. Show me a bird and I would forget the hour while studying the angle of its wings. Ask me to paint a hand, and before long, painting the hand would no longer be enough. I wanted to know what lay beneath the skin, the bones, the tendons, the muscles pulling each finger. Then I wanted to understand why those muscles moved, then how the nerves commanded them. One question became another and another, until the original task had almost disappeared. That is how my notebooks became what they became. Faces beside machines, horses beside geometry, studies of water beside weapons, human anatomy beside designs for wings that might one day carry a man into the sky. To someone looking at those pages centuries later, perhaps it all seems extraordinary. To me, it often felt like trying to catch a storm with a piece of paper. My mind would not stay still, and neither would my work. I remember Florence. I remember the monks of San Donato giving me a commission for an altarpiece, the Adoration of the Magi. It was important work, the kind of commission a young painter should have been grateful to receive. I was grateful. I was ambitious. I wanted to show them what I could do. At first, the scene seemed simple enough. Mary, the child. The Magi gathered around them. A sacred moment that painters before me had represented many times. Then I began drawing. I saw horses turning in the background, ruined architecture, men bending, twisting, reaching, faces filled with awe, confusion, fear. I wanted every figure to feel as though something enormous had just entered the world, and no one quite knew how to respond. Every time I added one figure, I imagined another. Every time I solved one part of the composition, another seemed weak. I could see what the painting might become. That was the danger. The more clearly I saw the perfect version in my head, the less willing I became to accept the imperfect one in front of me. I studied. I drew. I changed the arrangement. I changed it again. I pushed the painting further and further towards something I could almost see but never quite reach. Then Milan called. There were possibilities there that Florence could not offer me. Engineering, architecture, court work, machines, new patrons, new problems. I told myself I could leave and perhaps return to the altarpiece later. Later. There is a dangerous comfort in that word when you are young. Later feels endless. So I left. The adoration remained behind, unfinished. For a long time, I did not enjoy thinking about the monks waiting for something that never arrived. Eventually, they stopped waiting. Another artist was asked to create the altarpiece instead. People may look at my unfinished adoration now and admire the figures emerging from the surface, the movement, the ideas still visible beneath the paint. They may call the unfinished state fascinating. That is not how it felt to me. When you are the man who was supposed to finish it, an unfinished masterpiece is still an unfinished promise. And if you had been standing beside me then, what would you have done? Suppose everyone around you told you the work was good enough, but you could still see everything that was wrong with it. Would you deliver it anyway? Or would you keep working, even as patience around you disappeared? I wish I could tell you I found the answer. I did not. That question followed me for the rest of my life. I wish I could also tell you that leaving the adoration taught me discipline. That afterward I finished one thing before beginning another. It did not. In Milan, my mind became even more crowded. I could be asked to design a machine and find myself thinking about the movement of water. I could begin studying architecture and end the evening drawing a bird's wing. I would watch the way hair curled and suddenly think of currents in a river. I would study a shoulder to paint it more convincingly and end up dissecting the structure of the entire arm. One answer was never an ending for me. It was an entrance. That sounds beautiful when I say it now. Living with it was exhausting. The strange thing about becoming better at something is that satisfaction does not necessarily become easier. Sometimes it becomes harder. When I was younger, there were mistakes I simply could not see. Then I studied anatomy, and figures I once considered acceptable began to look lifeless. I studied light, and shadows I had once painted without hesitation began to seem false. I studied expression, and portraits that once looked convincing began to feel like masks. Every answer raised the standard. Imagine spending years improving your eyes, only to become less satisfied with everything those eyes can see. Perhaps that is why, years later, when Lisa sat before me in Florence, I immediately made a simple portrait much more difficult than it needed to be. At the time, she was simply a woman whose likeness I had begun to paint. There was no crowd standing behind me, no guards, no museum, no one crossing oceans simply to look at her face. No one whispered that this small wooden panel would become one of the most recognizable images in the world. There was only Lisa and me. I knew what a portrait was supposed to do. Capture the face, the clothing, the hands, the status of the sitter, make the likeness recognizable, finish it, deliver it. But by then I had spent too many years studying people. A human face is never still. That was the problem. A person can sit motionless, yet the expression is constantly changing. A thought enters the mind, and something happens around the eyes. The mouth tightens, then relaxes. A smile begins before you are certain it is there. You look away for a moment, and when you look back, the person seems slightly different. How could I paint someone who felt alive when paint itself could not move? That question took hold of me. And once a question takes hold of me, I have never been very good at escaping it. The mouth troubled me most. Too much expression, and she became obvious. Too little, and she became lifeless. So I softened the boundaries. I let light disappear gradually into shadow. I didn't want a hard line announcing exactly where the lips ended. I wanted the expression to remain uncertain. I treated the eyes the same way. One tone dissolved into another. I stepped back. Something happened. She seemed different from a distance. I moved closer, different again. For one brief moment, I thought I had found what I wanted. A sensible man might have stopped there. I became obsessed. I would work on the portrait, leave it alone, return, and immediately see something else. A transition in the cheek, a shadow beside the eye, the atmosphere behind her, the distant landscape. One more layer, one more day, one more look, then another. Almost. I came to hate that word. Almost right, almost alive, almost what I imagined. Almost finished. Almost is a dangerous word for someone like me, because almost always gives you permission to continue. Perhaps you know that feeling yourself. Perhaps there is something in your life you have been working on for far too long. A book, a business, a painting, a project you keep telling yourself you will release when it is just a little better. Would you rather finish something imperfect or keep working until it becomes what you imagined? Think about your answer. I spent most of my life unable to choose. And if that part of my story feels unexpectedly familiar, leave a like. It tells untold history that these quieter struggles behind famous names are worth telling. Because the part of my life that history remembers as genius did not always feel like genius while I was living it. Sometimes it felt like delay, sometimes it felt like doubt, sometimes it felt like failure. By then, I knew the pattern well. There was Saint Jerome, another painting I had begun and never completed. An old man kneeling in the wilderness, his body thin, his face filled with anguish. Parts of him had been worked carefully, other areas remained barely formed. And still, in my mind, I could see the finished version. That may be the cruelest thing about unfinished work. A finished object eventually becomes what it is. An unfinished one can remain perfect forever inside your imagination. The adoration. Jerome. Machines that never left the page. Architectural ideas that never became buildings. Experiments interrupted by other experiments. I could always imagine what each one might have become. And because I could imagine it, it was difficult to let it die. Lisa was different. I did not leave her behind. I kept the portrait with me. I returned to it. Years passed. Other patrons entered my life. Other projects demanded attention. I moved between cities. I grew older. Still, her face remained near me. Why? I have asked myself that many times. Perhaps I believed the work was incomplete. Perhaps it had become too personal to surrender. Perhaps the portrait had slowly transformed into a place where everything I had learned could meet. When I studied anatomy, I saw the face differently. When I studied light, I saw the shadows differently. When I watched distant mountains disappear into haze, I understood the landscape behind her differently. People often separate my interests into neat categories: Leonardo the painter, Leonardo the engineer, Leonardo the anatomist, Leonardo the inventor. I never lived that way. To me, they were all part of the same question. If I wanted to paint the hand, I wanted to know how the hand moved. If I wanted to understand movement, I needed to know the muscles. If I wanted to paint the eye, I needed to understand light. If I wanted to paint the mountains behind Lisa, I needed to understand air, water, stone, distance, everything connected. That was the beauty of it. It was also the trap. Because if everything connects to everything else, when are you ever finished? Patrons did not care much for that question. They wanted results. And they were not wrong. A church cannot hang a possibility above an altar. A ruler cannot use a machine that exists only in a notebook. A patron cannot admire a portrait the painter refuses to surrender. There were times when I frustrated people. There were promises I did not fulfill in the way they expected. I could always explain why. The experiment had revealed something unexpected. The design needed revision. The painting could become better. There was always a reason. But a reason does not make the unfinished thing finished. As I grew older, that became harder to ignore. When you are young, later feels infinite. I will finish it later. I will return to the experiment later. I will build the machine later. I will answer the question later. There is always another summer, another year, another blank page, until one day you realize there may not be. Your hands change, your body changes. You become tired in ways you did not when you were 20, and the unfinished things around your room begin to look different. When I was young, they were possibilities. When I grew old, some of them began to look like decisions I had already made. This drawing instead of that painting. This experiment instead of that commission. This question instead of another. Every page contained curiosity. Every page also contained time. And time was the one material I could never manufacture more of. That frightened me. Not because I believed I had done nothing. I knew I had worked. I knew I had created things. What frightened me was everything I could still see inside my mind. Machines not built, paintings not completed, questions barely begun. I could imagine decades of work. I had one lifetime. No mechanism could solve that. No geometry could extend it. No study of anatomy could bargain with it. For perhaps the first time, I understood that some of the things surrounding me would remain unfinished, not because I had temporarily abandoned them, but because I would die before I returned. That changes the way a man looks at his workshop. A pile of drawings stops looking like possibility. It begins to look like time already spent. And yet I kept Lisa. Sometimes I wondered what another painter would have done. He might have completed the portrait in a reasonable time, delivered it, accepted his payment, moved on. Perhaps that would have been wiser. Perhaps he would have produced twice as many paintings. But then I would notice something near her mouth. A tiny transition between light and shadow. Something no patron had asked me to change. Something most people would never notice. I noticed. And once I noticed, the old thought returned. It could be better. So I touched the brush to the panel again. There is arrogance in that, perhaps, the belief that one more adjustment matters. But there is fear in it too. A finished painting can disappoint you. Once you declare it complete, all the possibilities disappear. It becomes what it is. People can judge it. You can judge it. An unfinished painting still contains every version it might become tomorrow. Sometimes I wonder whether I hid inside that possibility. Perhaps beginning another experiment was easier than accepting that the work already in front of me would never become exactly what I had imagined. Age has a way of forcing uncomfortable questions upon you. Would I change it if I could? I do not know. History prefers simple answers. This was the mistake. This was the triumph. This was the moment everything changed. A life does not feel so clean while you are living it. If I had been more disciplined, perhaps I would have finished more paintings. If I had ignored anatomy and simply painted the human body as it appeared on the surface, perhaps more patrons would have been satisfied. If I had stopped watching birds because men could not fly, perhaps I could have spent those hours at the easel. If I had stopped studying water because no one had asked me to understand a whirlpool, perhaps another commission would have reached completion. My life might have looked much more orderly. But would I have seen the world the same way? Would Lisa's face look the same if I had never studied what lay beneath human skin? Would the landscape behind her feel the same if I had never watched distant mountains disappear into the atmosphere? Would I have understood light the same way? I cannot answer. Perhaps the part of me that prevented me from stopping was also the part that allowed me to see what others overlooked. Perhaps my weakness and my gift were never two different things. Tonight I return to the portrait. The room is colder now. The candle beside me has nearly disappeared. Lisa looks back with the same expression she has carried for years. I think of the adoration. I think of Jerome. I think of the pages filled with machines that may never move. All those beginnings. All those possibilities. And for a moment, I ask myself the question I have avoided for most of my life. Have I failed? If success means creating everything I was capable of imagining, then yes, completely. No man could finish everything I wanted to make. No man could answer every question I wanted to ask. Give me another 50 years, and I would still complain that there was more to understand. But perhaps that is not the right measure. Perhaps a life should not be judged only by how many ideas were crossed neatly from a list. Perhaps some questions deserve to exist even when they remain unanswered. Perhaps an unfinished drawing can teach someone how you looked at the world. Perhaps another mind can continue where yours stopped. Perhaps the things I thought I had abandoned were not always endings. Perhaps some of them were beginnings for people I would never meet. I look at Lisa again. She is almost finished. I smile when I think the word. Almost. There it is again. I should put the brush down. I know that. But then I notice the corner of her mouth. A transition between light and shadow. So small that perhaps no one else would ever see the difference. I see it. And once I see what something might become, I have never been very good at pretending that I do not. I reach for the brush. Just one more change. That is what I tell myself. Just one more. Before you leave me here tonight, I want to ask you one final question. If this were your painting, if you had already spent years trying to perfect it, would you finally put the brush down? Or would you make one more change? Tell me in the comments. I would like to know whether you would have been wiser than I was. And if my story has made you see Leonardo da Vinci a little differently, subscribe to Untold History. There are many names you already know: Caesar, Napoleon, Cleopatra, Washington. But knowing how their stories ended is not the same as knowing what it felt like before the ending was certain. If you want more stories told from inside those moments, subscribe. And if you want others to discover this one, leave a like. As for me, I still have work to do. Perhaps centuries from now, someone will look at this woman and wonder what she is thinking. Perhaps they will study the machines I never built and imagine what I intended. Perhaps they will stand before the paintings I left unfinished and see something I could not see while I was alive. I will never know. That may be the strangest thing about becoming history. You know where my story ends. I did not. I had no museum waiting for me, no books calling me a genius, no certainty that these pages would matter after I was gone. I had only the work in front of me. The questions I had not answered, the ideas I had not completed, and the growing knowledge that one lifetime would never be enough. So I kept looking, I kept drawing, I kept asking, and whenever the world told me something was finished, I looked once more. Because sometimes I could still see what it might become. And tonight, looking at the shadow beside her smile, I can still see it. Just one more change.